At 64 years old, gospel legend Donnie McClurkin has done something no one saw coming. He's broken his silence with a confession that has left fans heartbroken, emotional, and searching for answers. For decades, Donnie has been the voice of hope in the darkest moments of people's lives. His songs like We Fall Down, Stand, and Great Is Your Mercy have carried millions through heartbreak, loss, and redemption. But this time, it's his own heart that's been laid bare before the world. In a moment of raw honesty, Donnie looked straight into the camera, his voice trembling, and said 4 words that silenced an entire audience: "I may die alone." Those words didn't come from a place of despair. They came from decades of quiet pain, reflection, and faith. For someone who has devoted his entire life to lifting others, it was a rare glimpse into the personal cross he's carried for years. Behind the smile, behind the anointed voice, there was a man wrestling with the same questions many of us ask in silence. What if love never finds me? What if purpose costs me companionship? Donnie's confession wasn't about fame or music or even legacy. It was about truth, the kind that strips away image and leaves only humanity. And when that truth came out, the gospel world froze. Some were stunned, others cried. But everyone felt the weight of his words. Because what he revealed wasn't just his story. It was a reflection of something far deeper about faith, loneliness, and the cost of spiritual calling. In today's video, we'll explore the emotional truth behind Donnie McClurkin's heartbreaking confession, how years of trauma, fame, and solitude shaped his journey, and why this moment of honesty may redefine how we see one of gospel's greatest living legends. But first, to understand what brought Donnie to this powerful moment of vulnerability, we have to go back, long before the stages, before the spotlight, to the pain that began it all. Before the confession that stunned the gospel world, Donnie McClurkin was already a living legend, a man whose voice could fill a room and touch the deepest parts of the human soul. For decades, he's been the heartbeat of gospel music, the bridge between worship and emotion, faith and reality. Songs like Stand, We Fall Down, and Great Is Your Mercy didn't just top charts, they became anthems of survival, healing, and hope for millions around the world. From the moment Donnie stepped onto the stage, there was something different about him. His voice wasn't just powerful, it was anointed. Every note carried a story. Every lyric came from a place of pain and purpose. He didn't just sing about getting back up after falling, he lived it. His ministry wasn't built on perfection, but on perseverance. That's what made him so relatable, so human, and so unforgettable. But behind the awards, the packed churches, and the standing ovations, there was a quieter truth. A truth that few ever saw. A truth that Donnie himself tried to keep buried for years. Because while the world celebrated his spiritual strength, he was silently wrestling with emotional emptiness. Behind every uplifting song was a man searching for peace. Behind every sermon of victory was a private battle that few could imagine. Donnie often said that God gave him songs in his lowest moments, that the words came to him not from joy, but from brokenness. When he sang We Fall Down, he wasn't just encouraging others to rise again. He was reminding himself that falling doesn't mean failure, that God's mercy still finds us in our weakest hour. Those who worked closely with Donnie say that he carried a quiet intensity, a mixture of gratitude and heaviness. He smiled easily, laughed often, and loved deeply. But there were times when his eyes told a different story, one of loneliness and lingering pain. The kind of pain you learn to sing through because silence hurts more. And as his fame grew, so did the distance between his public image and his private reality. He became a symbol of faith for others. But for Donnie, faith had become both a source of healing and a mask. He poured out everything he had on stage. Yet when the lights faded and the audience went home, he returned to an empty room. Still, he pressed on. Because that's who Donnie McClurkin has always been. A man who keeps singing through the storm, even when his own heart is breaking. But to understand why his recent confession hit so deeply, we have to look even further back, before the albums, before the sermons, before the fame, to the pain that shaped his voice and the trauma that gave birth to his ministry. What happened in Donnie McClurkin's childhood would forever define the man he became, both on and off the stage. Before his voice became a global symbol of strength and faith, Donnie McClurkin was just a young boy growing up in Amityville, New York, and his story began not in the spotlight, but in silence. Behind the radiant smile that would one day light up gospel stages was a child learning to survive heartbreak far too soon. When Donnie was only 8 years old, his family faced tragedy. His younger brother, just 2 years old, was struck by a car and lost his life. That single moment shattered the peace of his childhood. Donnie would later describe that day as the moment everything changed, when his laughter faded and the weight of pain entered his heart for the first time. His home, once filled with love and music, became quiet, heavy with sorrow. But even as the family tried to move forward, more pain followed. In his youth, Donnie faced experiences that left him deeply hurt and confused. He has spoken publicly about those years, explaining that certain things happened to him that no child should have to face. Those early wounds left scars that time alone could not heal. Through it all, Donnie carried a sense of isolation, of being misunderstood, unseen, and unsure of where to turn. Yet, even in the darkness, a glimmer of light began to emerge. That light came in the form of music. The church became his sanctuary, the one place where he could breathe again. When he joined the choir, he discovered something powerful. Music had the ability to ease his pain, even if just for a moment. His voice became his prayer, his way of speaking to God when words weren't enough. As a teenager, his gift began to stand out. People said his singing felt different, as if every note carried both sorrow and hope. His voice wasn't just beautiful, it was healing. Those who heard him could feel the depth of emotion in every song, though few understood where it truly came from. For Donnie, the church was more than a stage. It was a place of refuge. It was where he could turn tears into worship and pain into purpose. He once said that music became his language with God, his way of finding strength when he felt weakest. If it weren't for music, he shared, I don't know where I'd be. Through faith and song, Donnie found something that resembled peace. But the memories never completely left him. They stayed tucked deep inside, shaping his voice, his heart, and eventually, his ministry. Those early experiences didn't break him. They built the foundation for the man he would become. Because the same pain that once silenced him would one day become the power behind his praise. And while the world would soon see Donnie McClurkin rise to incredible heights, behind that success was a man still learning how to heal. But fame, as he would soon discover, doesn't erase the past. It often magnifies it. And as Donnie's star began to rise, the weight of his unspoken struggles began to follow him everywhere he went. By the time Donnie McClurkin reached adulthood, his gift had become impossible to ignore. The same voice that once filled small church choirs in Amityville was now beginning to reach audiences far beyond his hometown. He wasn't just singing anymore. He was ministering through every lyric, every note, every moment. His music carried the weight of experience, the honesty of struggle, and the hope of redemption. In the 1980s and 1990s, Donnie's rise was nothing short of extraordinary. His songs We Fall Down, Stand, and Great Is Your Mercy became anthems for people across the world. Churches everywhere echoed his melodies, and believers found comfort in his message. For many, Donnie's voice became the sound of survival, the proof that faith could turn pain into purpose. But behind the applause, Donnie was still wrestling with the very emotions that had followed him since childhood. Fame brought him platforms, but it also brought pressure. The pressure to appear strong, to always have the answers, to never show weakness. He became not just a singer, but a symbol of perseverance and faith. And that image was both a blessing and a burden. In interviews, Donnie admitted that the higher his career climbed, the lonelier he sometimes felt. Fame doesn't fill the void, he once said. It only makes the silence louder. The lights were bright, the crowds were large, but when the music stopped, the loneliness remained. After every performance, after every powerful sermon, there were still nights when he would return to an empty home and sit in silence, talking only to God. As his ministry grew, so did his sense of isolation. Everyone expected Donnie McClurkin to be the strong one, the man who could heal others through song, the preacher who always knew what to say. But very few knew how much he was still healing himself. Behind the calm voice and confident smile, there was still a heart that carried the weight of old wounds and new expectations. Friends close to Donnie noticed it. They described him as warm and deeply caring, yet guarded. He was surrounded by people, but few truly knew him. He poured everything he had into his work, into his calling, sometimes at the expense of his own peace. That's what made his later confession so powerful. Because when he finally opened up, the world realized that even those who lead others to healing can be quietly crying for help themselves. Still, during these years, Donnie's music reached its peak. We Fall Down became a timeless classic, reminding listeners that falling isn't failure, it's part of faith. His voice echoed across nations, his albums won awards, and his ministry touched hearts in every corner of the globe. Yet for Donnie, success never erased the memories that shaped him. The stage was his platform, but the pain was still his companion. He continued to preach, to sing, and to serve. But inside, the tension between calling and contentment grew stronger. He had learned how to use his voice to heal others, but he was still learning how to let it heal himself. And then, as he entered his 60s, the world began to notice something different about him. There was a deeper stillness, a quiet heaviness behind his words. Donnie wasn't just talking about faith anymore. He was talking about truth. And that truth would soon take center stage in one of the most emotional moments of his entire career. Because one day, during a simple, heartfelt interview, Donnie McClurkin set aside the mask of perfection. He looked into the camera, took a deep breath, and spoke words that no one was prepared to hear. And in that moment, the gospel world stood still. It happened quietly. No stage, no spotlight, no choir behind him. Just Donnie McClurkin, sitting down for an interview, reflecting on his journey, and for the first time, letting the world see the cracks behind the faith. His voice, normally full of power and conviction, trembled slightly. The interviewer asked a simple question about legacy and love, but what came next would leave millions speechless. Donnie looked down for a moment, then lifted his eyes and said 4 words that no one expected. "I may die alone." Those words hung in the air like a silent thunder. It was the kind of honesty few public figures ever dare to show, especially someone whose life has been built on hope and faith. The man who had spent decades helping others heal had just admitted his own deepest fear: loneliness. He wasn't angry or bitter. He wasn't blaming anyone. His tone was peaceful, but it carried the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime searching for something that always seemed just out of reach. "I've traveled the world, I've sung for millions," he said, "but I come home to an empty house. I have family, I have friends, but I don't have what most people dream of: a life companion." Those words broke hearts. Across social media, fans and fellow gospel artists couldn't hold back their emotions. People who had been uplifted by Donnie's music for years suddenly saw the man behind the songs, a man who had given everything to ministry but still longed for simple human connection. Artists like Tasha Cobbs. Leonard praised his courage, saying his transparency was what made his ministry so powerful. Kirk Franklin and Marvin Sapp called his confession a moment of truth that would help countless others who silently battle the same emptiness. But not everyone heard his words with peace. Some fans were worried. They wondered if Donnie's admission was more than reflection, if it was a sign of exhaustion, the kind that comes after decades of giving without receiving. Others debated whether the pressures of gospel fame had cost him the chance at love, leaving him isolated in a world that only saw his stage persona. For Donnie, though, this confession wasn't about despair. It was about honesty. It was about finally allowing himself to say what so many feel but never voice. "People look at you and think you have it all," he said softly. "But they don't see the nights when you're praying just to make it through. That line hit home for thousands. Fans began sharing how they, too, had smiled through loneliness, served others while silently hurting, and prayed for peace in private. Donnie's words had become more than an interview. They had become a mirror for anyone who's ever felt unseen. Yet even in that raw moment, Donnie didn't stop at confession. He reminded his listeners that his faith had carried him through every season, even this one. "Even if I never find that kind of love," he said, "I'm still loved by God, and that's enough." It wasn't just what he said that moved people. It was how he said it. There was no bitterness, no regret, only surrender. The kind of surrender that comes when someone has finally made peace with who they are and where God has led them. Within hours, clips of his interview began circulating online. The gospel community, the Christian world, and even mainstream audiences couldn't stop talking about it. Here was a man who had spent his entire life preaching strength, now showing that real strength sometimes looks like vulnerability. But what many didn't realize was that this wasn't just a passing confession. It was the beginning of something deeper, a revelation that would reshape how Donnie McClurkin saw his life, his calling, and his purpose. Because when he finally explained why he believed his life had unfolded this way, the world understood that his story wasn't just about loneliness, and it was about divine purpose, and that revelation would touch souls in ways no song ever could. After the emotional interview that shook the gospel world, Donnie McClurkin later explained the deeper meaning behind his words, and what he revealed transformed sadness into something sacred. He said he no longer saw his singleness as a curse, but as a calling. "For years," he shared, "I asked God why I couldn't have what others had, a wife, a family, someone to grow old with. But now I understand. It wasn't rejection, it was protection." Donnie spoke about moments when he tried to force relationships that weren't meant for him, only to feel a spiritual unease. "Every time I thought I found love," he said, "something in my spirit wouldn't settle. God would whisper, 'Not this one.'" In time, he realized that God wasn't keeping love from him. He was keeping him for something greater. He began to see that his solitude had purpose. "Maybe my calling required stillness," he said. "Maybe I had to walk this road alone so my voice could reach those who feel the same." His words brought peace to countless fans who had felt forgotten or left behind, reminding them that solitude doesn't mean insignificance. It can mean assignment. Even in his quiet moments of reflection, Donnie's message remained powerful. God never wastes pain. The same loneliness that once broke him had become the fuel for his ministry, the empathy behind every lyric, and the strength behind every sermon. "I may not have a partner," he said, "but I have purpose, and that's more than enough." With those words, Donnie McClurkin reminded the world that faith isn't the absence of pain. It's the courage to keep believing that every unanswered prayer still leads to divine purpose. In the end, Donnie McClurkin's story isn't one of loss, it's one of grace. What began as a confession of loneliness became a testimony of peace. He told the world that even though his life didn't unfold the way he imagined, it was never without meaning. "Every step, every tear, every unanswered prayer," he said, "was leading me closer to God's purpose for my life." He found beauty in solitude, not emptiness, but clarity. Through silence, he heard God's voice more clearly than ever before. "I may never have the kind of love the world celebrates," Donnie said, "but I've known a love deeper than that, the kind that never leaves." Fans around the world wept, not out of pity but out of understanding, because in Donnie's honesty, they saw their own reflection, proof that even the strongest among us can feel alone.